In this video, I'm going to show you everything that you need to know in order to install an at-home drip irrigation system to automate your watering and get better harvests. Installing a drip irrigation system is an amazing and worthwhile upgrade for any garden. It saves you time, it saves you water, and you're more consistent, which yields bigger and better harvests. And I'm not talking about a soaker hose or those pre-made and gimmicky drip irrigation grids. By the end of this video, you'll have learned everything that you need to know in order to install a DIY yet professional grade drip irrigation system for your garden. And you'll even be able to go on vacation this summer without worrying about all of your plants dying. Yes! In order to design and install a drip irrigation system that is going to function properly, there are some details that you really need to be able to understand and apply to your situation. And there's one detail that I don't see anyone talk about that is crucial to ensure that your system functions properly. But don't worry, none of this is difficult. And once you know and understand these details, you'll be able to design and install a drip irrigation system for any type of garden. All right, first let's start off with the basics. Every drip irrigation system is going to need these specific things in order to function properly. And this system right here is what controls the drip irrigation for my whole 1,000 square foot or 300 square foot growing space vegetable garden. You're going to need a check valve, a pressure regulator, a filter, and a timer in order to automate the process. We're going to install a check valve right below our spigot or our hose. Whatever your water supply is, the check valve is going to only allow water to flow in one direction. We don't want any dirty water reverse flowing through the system and back into our clean water supply. Then we're going to use a pressure regulator. This is going to vary based on what type of tubing you're actually using in your drip irrigation system. I'm using drip line, so I have a 25 PSI pressure regulator. Whichever type of tubing that you're using, you'll just have to make sure that you get a pressure regulator that's rated for that type of system. For example, drip line might only be 15 pounds, so you'd have to get a 15-pound regulator in order to supply your system. Then we're going to have a filter. All of our drip irrigation systems supplies, i.e. drip tubing or drip line, has really, really tiny emitters. And we want to make sure our water is free of any debris so that we actually don't clog our system. So I would definitely recommend using a filter. And last but not least, literally the brains of the whole system, a timer, which is going to simplify the process. We're going to set everything on here once, and we're going to forget it for the rest of the season. I absolutely love this timer by Rainpoint, and we're going to be talking even more about it later in the video, but I want to give you a quick demonstration on how this works because I absolutely love this timer and its features. The most important thing is that it has 2 zones, which means that it can split off from one area to another, which is extremely important. This is the part of the system that no one ever talks about, and it is essential. But in regards to the timer here, it has so many different features. I can turn my drip irrigation system on and off very easily. I can program how often my drip irrigation system is going off just by hitting the plus or minus button. I'm going every 2 days. I can go how long each one of these zones is running for. Every time my drip irrigation system goes on, it goes on for 26 minutes, and I can easily change it up or down. I am also determining the start time. I want my plants to get water first thing in the morning, so that way it sets them up well in the beginning of the day, and my plants are going to be perfectly hydrated all throughout the day, even in the middle of summer. And last, but certainly not least, is a rain delay. If it rains, I can basically tell my drip irrigation systems to pause, take a break, and wait a couple days before it runs again, so that way I'm not overwatering the garden. This timer is absolutely great, and if you want to pick one up for yourself, I'll put a link down in the description. If you have any more questions about how to use this timer, let me know down in the comments. But this supply header is required for every single automated drip irrigation system. This is what's going to put your watering on autopilot and ensure that your system is going to function the right way every single time. So from the supply valve that's all the way over there, this 3/4 inch poly line runs all the way through my garden, and then it branches off to every single one of my garden beds. And you can see it running right here. And we're gonna use this garden bed as an example because I just harvested my garlic and you can actually see the whole setup that I like to use. So off of my main supply line, what you can do is either use a T like this or an elbow to branch off of that line to direct your drip irrigation system to the specific garden bed that you want to water. In this case, I used a T because the line continues to go off in that direction. But off of that T, on every single one of my garden beds, I like to install a valve, which allows me to just turn off the drip irrigation system specifically to this garden bed. So if I have a leak or something, I'm not just wasting water from it dumping out over here, and it's also going to affect how the system performs in every single garden bed. So having this valve here is really important so that way you can just fix the issue while the system is still operating elsewhere. Then I use a little bit of drip line with an elbow and another T to make this supply header for the individual garden bed. And as I said, these connections are literally just plug and play. I can just twist this right here, twist this off, and just be able to pull off this line. And it's completely modular in that way. So you can just design the system and put it together however you want. And I'll make sure that I put a link down to Drip Depot in the description. But if you're also struggling with designing a system for your garden, let me know in the comments and I'd be more than happy to set up a consultation call with you and design your drip irrigation system for you. But when I create my drip irrigation systems, I like to use a supply header. So this is coming off of the main line, and then we're branching out into a header where I have 3 different drip lines. And I don't like my drip lines to be more than a foot apart, so that way we get good coverage across the whole garden bed. So I basically just use some of that supply tubing in order to make pieces run off to the right and to the left. And then I'll use a hole puncher that comes with most drip irrigation kits, punch a hole approximately where I want it, and just plug in the line. One trick that I've learned, and I really don't see a lot of people do, is you have all 3 of these lines. You can just run it down the length of your garden bed and call it a day. You would just plug off the end right here. But what I like to do is make a header at the back end of my raised bed. The reason why I like to do this is if a clog develops in one of these lines, you'll actually get water supplied up from another line and then to the back end of that line. So if I just had a straight run, and let's say I got a clog at this emitter right here, the emitter back here wouldn't be getting any water, and the back end of my raised bed would remain dry. But by installing this header, I'm allowing water to flow up a different line and come this way, and then make sure every single emitter is getting water, even if there is a clog. So I like to make a header at the front and the back end. So that way we could just stretch this all the way down, and now I know that my system will always get water everywhere on the raised bed. So that's a general description of how my system is set up. But this is just the beginning. Now we need to understand, and this is the important part, how to actually design the system for it to function properly. Because you could just throw together a drip irrigation system similar to what I just made, and it might work, but it also might not, and here's why. Every single water supply, like this spigot that's coming out of my house, is going to have a limit to how much water it can actually push out at any given time. And if your system needs more water than this can supply, your system is not going to work properly. For example, I've got my spigot running and I've got my hose running, and I have this flow meter right here from Rainpoint, which I absolutely love. It tells me in real time what my flow rate is. So now I know the flow rate coming out of this spigot is 3.5 gallons per minute. That is the limit at which my spigot can supply water. So if I throw a drip irrigation system together for my garden and the overall flow rate is more than 3.5 gallons per minute, the system isn't going to work properly. There's not going to be enough water to actually supply everything that your garden needs. And this is what we need to do in order to figure out how to supply the system properly. I'm going to throw a nice little description up on the screen here for you just to make sure everything makes sense. What we need to do is figure out the amount of flow is going to every single one of our garden beds. And this is what making every single garden bed, whether it's an in-ground garden bed or a raised garden bed, the same dimensions makes this really simple, because then you only have to do this once and you can just figure out the total flow of your whole garden. But even if you have different sized garden beds, it's really not that difficult. But let's work with this raised bed right here. It's 3 foot by 10 foot, and I've got 3 emitters on here. The drip line that I'm using for this garden bed is 10 foot long, which means that it has 10 emitters, and each emitter is outputting water at half a gallon per hour. So if we have 10 emitters putting out a flow of half a gallon per hour, each line is putting out 5 gallons every single hour. And since we have 3 lines, that means this individual garden bed is using about a quarter gallon of water every single minute. So since our supply flow rate is almost 3.5 gallons per minute, and this single garden bed only needs a quarter gallon per minute, we know that the system is going to work properly. But the problem lies is when you add more and more and more garden beds. So if you don't understand what your water source can actually supply and the demand that your system is putting on your supply, then you can very easily create a system that just doesn't function the way you want it to. So understanding these little details will help you not only design, but also create a drip irrigation system that will work and function properly. So if you have a relatively large garden like I do, where I have over 13 raised beds, my supply isn't enough to keep up with the demand of my garden. So in that case, what do I do? And that goes back to the timer that I have from Rainpoint. It has 2 zones. So what I've done is actually split my garden in half. So at any given period of time, only half of my garden is getting watered. So that means I'm only putting half the demand of my garden on my supply, which means that I will always have enough water when one of the zones are running. So this timer allows me to split my garden watering in half. You probably remember seeing 5 a.m. on zone 1. So I'll let my drip irrigation run for a given period of time, and I'll make sure that it doesn't switch over to the other zone until zone 1 is watered. So now the next part of figuring out how to design the system is, how long do I actually let my system run for? The whole point of this system is to get targeted and accurate watering. And now that we know the demand of our garden beds at any given period of time, we can figure out exactly how long to run this system for to give us the exact amount of water that we need. So to do this properly, we are going to have to do a little bit more math, similar to what we did for determining the flow rate of this garden bed. And to make it easy again, I'll throw it up on the screen. But you're going to have to calculate the amount of demand that every single one of your garden beds needs. And I know that all of my garden beds are the exact same dimensions. They have the exact same demands on my system. So every single one of my garden beds needs 0.25 gallons of water every single minute. So if I have 8 garden beds along here, 8 times 0.25 is 2 gallons per minute. So I know that when my system turns on, it's supplying water at a rate of 2 gallons per minute. So a disclaimer right now, every system is going to be a little bit different because it totally depends where you live. Where we are in southeastern Virginia, we do get quite a bit of rain. So my system isn't going to be running all the time. And I know the amount of water that I have to supply. But if you're living somewhere like in the high desert, you're gonna probably have to water your garden more often, and just deeper, longer periods of watering. But the thumb rule that I like to use is 1 gallon per every single square foot of gardening space. So if I have a 25 square foot garden bed, I'm gonna want to water that garden 25 gallons every single week. And what I like to do is break up my waterings so that way I'm watering my garden about 3 times a week. This is going to ensure that I'm watering my garden deeply, which my plants love. All right, so if my goal is to water my garden 25 gallons every single week, and that's gonna be the same across every single garden bed, which makes it nice. So 25 gallons every single week, and I'm gonna water my garden 3 times a week. So 25 divided by 3 is about 8. So that means every time I water, I want to supply every garden bed with 8 gallons of water. And I know that my system supplies 0.25 gallons every single minute. So if I divide my demand or my need, which is 8 gallons, divided by 0.25 gallons per minute, that means I need to run my system for about 33 minutes in order to deliver that 8 gallons of water. So now you have all of the information that you need in order to understand how a drip irrigation system truly functions, how to design it, all of the parts you need, how to set it up, and how to get it to operate properly. And I know the math can seem a little bit intimidating, but just watch this over again and it'll start to make sense. And again, if you have questions, leave them down in the comments. I would be more than happy to help you figure out how to design a specific system for your garden. But these are the fundamentals and the essentials that every single drip irrigation system needs in order to function properly. And I know that after you get the system installed in your garden, you're going to have even better harvest, the best harvest that you have ever had, and you're going to be able to put your watering on autopilot. So you can do other things. You can care for your garden. You can do the weeding and the harvesting that you always need to do. Some people love to hand water, and I get that, and I do it sometimes as well. But there is nothing more reliable than having a system that is automated and it's working for you even when you forget. So you can come out here and enjoy the garden that you have put so much time and effort into. And I'm all about saving time and working smarter and not harder. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know if you need a follow-up video on this topic, and I'd be more than happy to create one. Thanks for coming along with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.